Hi everyone. Today I'm joined by Wayne Brazel, who is an experienced actuary and a qualified pilot. Wayne has over 30 years experience across the Australian and North American markets, and he's currently the Chief Actuary and Appointed Actuary of MetLife Australia. Wayne is passionate about the importance of developing people and building important skills that we need today to set ourselves up for success tomorrow. Wayne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Julia. It's a real pleasure.
So Wayne, 30 years of experience, 30 plus years of experience, I'll bet in your time you have seen everything from the good, the bad and the ugly in terms of great leaders. I'd love to hear from you, what, in your opinion, what makes a great actuarial leader?
Yeah, thanks, Julia. I think, look, I guess let me just start off with my view on the services industry. We provide a service, we don't provide a physical product. So from my perspective, our most valuable resource is actually our people. It's our intellectual property. So for me, that makes leadership hugely important because the quality of our people will determine the quality of our outcome. So I think that, it's really important, regardless of the role that you play as an actuary, leadership is hugely important. And before I go into the specifics around sort of leadership, I just also want to make the point that leadership is not just about leading people, but it's as much thought leadership. And that's really important to consider because particularly for junior actuaries or even students, you have that opportunity to exhibit thought leadership even without having any direct report. So never underestimate the value that you can bring in that context. I think in terms of, leading a team, I think first of all, I'd like to say that leadership and management are two different things in my view. So management is far more about, the organizational aspects of getting things done, making sure timelines are met and so forth. But leadership is far bigger than that in my mind. That's about setting the vision and not setting the vision and pushing it down, but actually getting engagement and ownership of that vision and that common goal within the whole team, because it's all about ownership. It's about ownership and empowerment. And if people are part of that vision, they will take it on as something that they want to do rather than they're being told to do. So I think that's really important.
That's a really good distinction, Wayne. So management is kind of the day-to-day getting things done, but leadership is sort of inspiring and engaging and helping people understand the why of why they're doing those things.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great exposition of that. Yeah. I think one of the key things for me is you need to be creating a cohesive team that's focused on delivering results. As I say, setting the vision, being clear about goals, responsibilities, authorities, and giving people license. Once you set those parameters, actually giving them the autonomy and authority to actually act within that. Because if you sort of say, this is how we have to operate and this is, what you can do, but you're always always micromanaging them, you're actually taking away that empowerment. And people learn from doing and, in some cases making mistakes. And you've got to create the environment that you can allow people to make mistakes within the environment where it's caught at the right point, and so it stays as a learning situation within the team and people grow from the experience, and it doesn't go outside in the form of poor advice. So I think that's really important. We hear so much about diversity, and I think that's really important. And we hear it in particular focus areas around gender, race, and so forth. To me, the real diversity is about thought, skill, and perspective. Now, all of those whether it's gender, race, or otherwise, to me, that comes back to the diversity of thought, skill, and perspective. But I think the really important thing to remember in that is getting that diversity is only part of the solution. You've actually got to create the environment where that diversity is actually brought into the business in real practice. So that, I think, is all about creating an environment that is really open. It's a safe environment for challenge, for questioning, because unless you do that, the diversity of thought and so forth actually can't come through and create that that strong environment. So, we've all heard the saying, a great team will be better than a team of great players.
Yes.
And it's that strength. You have to have all of those skill sets, all of those thoughts, perspectives, actually coming together and supplementing the strengths across the team for the diversity to really add the value that we know that it does.
Yeah. So we need to have the diversity, but we also need to harness the diversity and make sure that we are getting that additional thought, skill, and perspective from our team members, and creating an environment where we can harness that and bring that to the team.
That's right. And we sort of touched on thought leadership earlier, because this actually expands across multidiscipline sort of projects as well, because you may not have a team yourself, but there's often times when actuaries are leading a project and it's the same situation where they need to synthesize expertise from underwriters, claim managers, product managers, etc. It's exactly the same concept.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that really gave me a lot of satisfaction in this context around creating that safe environment was one of my more junior team members sent an email to me to question a decision I'd made, and he was comfortable enough to copy the whole team.
Oh wow, he's brave.
I saw the question and I thought, oh wow, okay, fair enough.
Yep.
And
how did you handle it?
Well, it was great, because I had to be really open and honest back to say, actually, the question you've raised is a really good question. And I can't tell you that the decision I made was the right decision compared to this decision, because actually there wasn't enough information to make a distinction between the two. The reason why I went down this direction was this, and this. And my assessment of the situation meant that I felt that these reasons outweighed the reasons for the going down the other track. But it was a really good situation, because that just sort of opened that up. People felt free to question. It was great to see this individual thinking, but I think that environment is fantastic, because look, my wife may not agree to this, but I like to think that I'll be the first to say that I'm not perfect. But
we're human.
Yeah, that's right. And the worst case for me is I have made a mistake. One of my team members picks it up and says, well, look, I think we need to address this. It's great, because if nothing else, it stays within the department before that advice goes to the business, where actually the implications could be fairly serious. But the other end of that spectrum is I might be 100% right, but it then helps me to understand, okay, so this person's questioned it. That tells me a bit more about what their level of understanding is and the visibility they're getting to the broader perspective of the decision. So that gives me the position to be able to impart more understanding and insight for them. So that's able to sort of learn from that.
So it's win-win. So if you if you can create a team environment where people feel safe to ask questions, not only are you potentially strengthening the risk management around what's coming out of your team and the advice that's being shared, but also you're creating an opportunity for people to develop. And that's a win-win situation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And
if you're brave enough to create that team environment as a leader, not all leaders are.
Yeah, that's right. And you're right. I think that courage is a really important factor in leadership. And, my personal view is that, some of the problems we have in the industry at the moment has been the result of a lack of courage of leadership in the industry. I remember when the Trowbridge report came out that talked about lapse. And people sort of responded to it as though, oh, wow, what a great insight. Actually, that's not true. We knew about it 20 years earlier. We knew that agents were churning. I had looked at a portfolio and saw that it was 1% of our advisors who decimated the profitability of a particular portfolio because of their churning. So we knew that, but as a business, we didn't have the courage to actually say, we need to rein in some of these advisors because we've been so focused on, we need to get new business. We can't upset the advisor. I mean, at one company, an advisor was almost dictated terms to the insurance company because of the volume that person wrote.
Wow.
When we looked closely, this individual was writing only business to doctors, which was one of the worst performing segments.
Yep.
And when we looked at the claim experience from this individual, they were averaging 2 claims per year.
Wow.
Well, that individual was killing value for the company, not generating value, pandering to them. And so courage, I think, is a really important thing. And there's a number of situations where you do have to have courage. You've got to be sensible about how you go about it. You've got to understand, where you might be wrong, and be open to it. I remember in my time in Canada, it's a fairly it's an interesting environment where you're working in somebody else's market. So it's not the expert with 20 years experience. So to tell somebody, actually, you've missed something and you're wrong, that takes a bit of courage. We had a situation where we were purchasing another business, and the information memorandum that came from the investment bank was incorrect. So if you think of, they have what they call PADs, provision for adverse deviation. So a bit like saying some of our capital margins being included in our policy liability. Well, in the information given to us showed those balance sheet items year on year, they actually told us that they were releases of those margins rather than the balance of the margins. So the amount of value that error created was something like 100 million.
Huge.
For me, as an actuary with 1 year experience in the Canadian market, trying to tell actuaries who had been there for 30 years that there was a fundamental error here, so one, it required being subtle and nuanced about how you go about it, and two, you needed courage. So, that was, and you need to sort of bring people in line with you. And these are some of the softer skills that you need to learn. So, I mean, the way in which I approached that was I talked to people who were very, my sort of level, and explained my concerns and how I saw it to them, got them their heads around the concept, got their agreement, and yes, this is an issue, and then went with them to the next level. Because I had to effectively tell the head of the whole Canadian business that there was a serious issue here. So of course I wasn't going to go straight to them, but you build that alignment, you build that sort of momentum. But that takes courage.
Takes courage, and it takes skill to know how to handle that kind of situation as well.
That's right. Yeah, and perhaps where it's ethical, it becomes harder. The portfolio we had purchased, for those who remember the old Life Insurance Act, you had a lot of provisions within the policy liabilities. Well, the same occurred with in Canada. They were going from an old conservative valuation basis to a new realistic reporting basis. And what that meant was there was a lot of reserves that were going to be released, and they were looking to actually take that value and give it to the shareholders. Well, this was a participating portfolio. So me as the actuary saying, well, that is not ethical.
No, we need to protect the policyholders.
Yeah, that's right. It was a very nuanced situation, because then the question was, well, who built up that value? Was it the current policyholders, and then they really do own it? Or was it actually policyholders that have long since left the company? Well, there is no, ownership there. Those conversations where it's very nuanced, it's judgment-based, likewise takes a lot of courage and can be very difficult at times. But I think that's where, we have to stand up.
Yes, we do have to stand up. So leadership skills and being a great actuary really goes beyond our technical training, because that's a given, but we need to have these other skills like courage and the ability to have those challenging conversations. What opportunities, Wayne, do you think new actuaries should actively seek to set themselves up to be able to do this?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that are available. I think the easy one to think of is just there's a lot of things that have gone on over the years, and so I've been really fortunate. There's been a number of senior actuaries that I've been able to talk to, and they've been there, done that. So while they may not have faced the same situation, there's things that they have seen that give you a sense of how to approach it. So I think developing a network, particularly older, more experienced. Who can bring that bigger perspective to it, I think is really important. I think as younger actuaries and as students, where our vision is far more sort of fixated on the detail, and as you sort of see more, and you develop that bigger perspective, and just in a valuation context, well, you might have an issue on one product, but the integrity of the reserves is not that every single product is perfect, but overall your reserves are appropriate, and that you will be there to meet. There's a number of things there, meeting standards and so forth, but the point is really you can't get caught up on insignificant things, and having those mentors give you some of that perspective and things that you might not have considered, which is really important.
And how would you do that, Wayne? So if you were a newly qualified actuary and wanting to take your advice that you've just given of, finding some more experienced actuaries as mentors, how do you go about doing that? How would you suggest they go about doing that?
Yeah, look, committees is a great opportunity, joining institute committees. I join them, and I'm constantly thinking that, far more qualified and knowledgeable actuaries in the room than I.
Wow, even after 30 years, you feel that way, Wayne.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure everyone else is thinking that about you.
Well, I think that's somewhat the nature of actuaries. And you had posted on LinkedIn the other day, and I'm sorry I didn't get to read the article, but 117% of actuaries don't feel qualified for, was it leadership roles? Is that?
Yep.
Yeah, but I think that comes back to our psyche as actuaries, because the importance of our role is such that we need to be right.
Yep.
And so
we're trained to have the right answer. We're trained to have a solid, robust number.
That's right. And I think there's a so first of all, that creates the fear of being wrong.
Yes.
And I think this is a really important thing for us to understand and acknowledge, because that creates a closed mindset. That talks to our value is in our knowledge and in being right. Whereas we actually should be having the growth mindset that says we need to be continually learning. We need to continually expand our understanding, because what was right 10 years ago is not necessarily what's right today, because our environment evolves. So, I think that's a really important thing. And in fact, that also comes back to, the role of the leader as well, because that whole question of the creating the safe environment for challenge and so forth, and getting the benefit of diversity, one of the most beneficial things of that is, as the leader, you then actually don't have to have all the right answers, because you're leveraging the quality and expertise of the team. And so I think that's really important. But yeah, I'm constantly challenged by, some of the things that other experienced actuaries say. And I think, oh, wow, I hadn't looked at it from that perspective. So I think that's a real value add for students and junior actuaries to join committees.
Join committees, yep.
That visibility. Obviously you've got to do it fairly carefully, but I'd be looking to ask questions, find people that you trust, and ask them questions. This whole mindset question, I reflect on all of the Institute seminars and so forth. After you've gone to a number of them, you'll notice that in a room of 1,000 people, year on year, you can probably limit the number of people who make a comment or ask a question to about 20.
It's a small group, isn't it?
That's right. And so I think, as I say, part of our psyche is that sort of fear of being wrong. And we have to acknowledge that we've got really strong skill sets. And when you compare yourself amongst the elite, and I know this is a very sort of arrogant sort of label, but actuaries have really strong skill sets. Don't underestimate that skill set just because there are other actuaries who know more than you. I've worked with people who are the authority in Australia, and I must admit, part of my sort of, I guess, challenge was always to try and pick something with that individual where I could actually win the argument and find it. But I can tell you that, there were few, not many of those. On the whole, I would listen to them, and where I thought that there might have been an error, I'd challenge. But
well, it comes back to what you were saying before, Wayne, about us all being human or not being perfect. And even as leaders, we don't have to know everything, but creating an environment where we've got a growth mindset ourselves to realise that there's new things we can learn, or the world's changed a bit since, we last looked at something, and to continue to develop. That sets us up to future-proof our own careers, doesn't it? And to help us continue to grow as leaders.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, it reminds me, when I was sort of making the decision to accept the role as appointed actuary, that was a really challenging thing for me, because
was it? In what way?
Yeah, because I could see that there was a lot of things as an actuary to me, I didn't see myself as, I ticked all the boxes. I could see that things that, were strengths, but other things that were weaknesses. And, that'll always be the case. And Anthony Asher, who's a very great friend, I had a good talk with him about, taking on the role and so forth, which was really helpful. So again, it comes back to that value of networking. But I think the other thing for us to remember also is, even we'll never be perfect, but at the level that we're at, we still have value that we can pass on to people who are more junior to us. So It doesn't mean that, so for them at their stage, that is really valuable. It doesn't mean that that won't evolve for them. And that's also important, because there is no one right leadership model. Leadership is all about creating a style that works for you with your skill sets and your expertise, and because that's the way that you are authentic, and you're not trying to be somebody else, so you can actually you're always better at being yourself than being somebody else. But it also makes room for your team to help you. That gives them that feeling of success, empowerment, value. And if you don't mind, I'll go back to some of, I think, the characteristics of leadership, because, I think a lot of it has to come back to, you're there to help your people. And I'm not talking about the union leaders mold where, excuse me,
you're standing up for rights, or
yeah, that's right. Because one of the biggest challenges of leadership is to sit with your guys to say, this is not a good situation, and I accept that's not working well, but actually we've got to focus on what we can do, not what the problems are. And by doing that, you help lift your team to better performance. I think that's a really important thing. Listening to your people, understanding where they're at. Ian Bullcraig made that similar comment. I think that's really important, because when you do that, you can set manageable stretch goals for people. So don't feel totally out of their depth. And they can make incremental changes, but it also gives them opportunity to grow. An interesting thing that I found years back, I was a direct report of an appointed actuary, and so it goes back a number of years. So don't try and think who this was, but I went to them with a view, I've got this issue, I think this is the solution. And I went to the AA in my normal catch up, and I said, well, look, I'm thinking about this, this, and this. And straight away, the AA said, oh, well, this is the answer. And just went through it. And I thought, you've missed a huge opportunity here, because it was important for me to be able to articulate it, and so that I could actually crystallize the thinking properly. It was also a real opportunity for, and it also was important for me to demonstrate to you that I understood it. And you've missed the opportunity to actually help me to grow, adjust it where there were gaps, if that was the case, but you didn't empower me. And I think, that's really important, that, we give our people that opportunity to grow and, create sort of vacuums for them to grow into, I think is important.
So it was like the opposite experience to what you've probably learnt from that experience yourself. And now as the leader, you're not doing that to your people. You're not sort of shutting them down, because you know that by having that conversation, it's an opportunity for them to grow and develop. And it's also an opportunity for you to ensure that the right advices or the right directions being taken as a team.
That's right. Because we learn the best when we've had to grapple with something.
Yes.
So even if it's a no-brainer to you as the leader, you don't want to give them the answer. So, and if it's important to get the answer soon, well, that's okay. Give them prompts, help lead them into their thinking, so that they can still go through that process and crystallize it for them, because then it really makes it concrete for them. And I guess the other thing with leadership, and this is probably the hardest thing of all, you have to have challenging conversations. And it's not, you can't see it as, well, this is not nice for the individual. You have to see it as, actually, I'm doing, out of my care for you, as somebody I have responsibility over, this I need to talk to you about. And I had a situation with one person over the last few years where I had a really challenging conversation with them, and I was saying, well, look, I'm concerned.
As the leader, you were the leader?
That's right, yeah. And, I spoke to them about why I thought it fell short, what I thought the opportunity was in that situation. And, it was a pretty tough conversation. But I can tell you that individual, their performance over the next 12 months just was amazing. And as a leader, that is one of the things that I take so much pride from, to see that, that individual was able to respond so strongly. People, and this is something I've taken a long time to learn, but you need to see feedback as a gift. And so now I've started, from a couple of years, well, probably 2 years ago now, I've actively sought feedback from my boss. Prior to that, it was something that I didn't really look forward to, because I didn't like to know my mistakes. But it is really valuable. And for those who can be open to that feedback, and you've got to create that trusting environment, it's really valuable. But having said
and takes courage, but what a great payoff. You had the courage to have that conversation, and that individual was then able to really develop and have a better trajectory in terms of their career path and skill development, perhaps, than if you hadn't have had that conversation. Because sometimes it's so tempting to just tiptoe around those situations. It takes a lot of courage to have those difficult conversations and to provide some feedback. But when it works, it's so powerful.
Yeah, that's right. But you've got to remember that your perception could be wrong. So you've got to give the individual the opportunity to explain their perspective of it, because it might be that you've got to go away and do a bit more, get a bit more context. But even if you are 100% right, the fact that they feel they've been heard is really important. And, the caveat on all of this that I'm saying is, I know that there'll be people who have worked for me in the past thinking, oh, that is so hypocritical, etc., etc. Because ultimately,
we all learn. We all get better with time. We're all a work in progress.
And as well as that, some of this is, well, it's one thing to have these thoughts and what you want to achieve, but one of the challenges is actually internalizing that and sort of acting it. I don't mean acting in the sense that it's not who you are, but actually putting it into practical application. Because there was a hard conversation that I had, that I was sort of picking up a problem that had been lingering prior to my involvement. Because it had been lingering so long, that hard conversation actually didn't go well, because it really was a conversation that should have been had 2 or 3 years before I was ever on the scene. And I think, again, that comes back to our responsibility as leaders, looking after our people. It's really important to address things as soon as you can.
Yes.
And offer the help. You know, it's in your interest as well as theirs for your people to perform their best. So
That's right.
look, you know, I've seen this as an issue. I think these are some of the things that we should work on. Let me help you. You know, tell me how I can help you. You know, and I think
be part of the solution. Provide support as part of the solution, not just identifying a problem and asking them to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good.
So in terms of those opportunities, the networking, mentoring, broadening your relationships, because, you know, you can even create diversity of your own thinking by talking to different people. You know, sort of when we do pricing, you know, we think that a policy term and condition means this, but when you talk to the claims people, they say, well, we can't implement that because will get straight onto us and say, you know, you can't do it. Or the underwriter didn't ask the right questions. So regardless of that condition, our hands are tied. So just understanding that, you know, so I think that's really valuable. And, you know, and again, I guess always remember you have lots of value to impart. So be comfortable with having the discussions with other professionals. You know, things that we think is just a no-brainer because of what we know and our perspective. You know, I've had situations where I've thought it's almost not worth talking to the business about this issue, but I've raised it and I thought, wow, that's really important.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
So it felt obvious to you. You thought everyone would know, but then actually it was, you needed to say it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the simple thing like the acquisition cost of winning a new group scheme is a lot more than the acquisition cost of helping the fund get new members, which is actually more than encouraging an existing member to just top up their contribution. So, you know, where is your focus going to be, or where should it be? I mean, obviously you can't continually get members to put more and more in. So there's a mix of that. But similarly, you know, we focus a lot on writing new business, but when you look at the embedded or the value of new business for, you know, an extra $1 of sales and compare that to the preserved value of stopping $1 lapsing, well, actually, that might mean that your focus should change. You know, so,
a lot of outside the box thinking and being able to really step back from what's in front of you and think differently about what you're saying and question and be curious and to raise what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. And perhaps be aware of community trends. You know, as an industry, we got caught big time with hay and roll commission. We know that following the law is not sufficient because the law lags community sentiment. But it's community sentiment and perspectives that is going to bring us unstuck or not, because reputation relies on that, not on compliance with the law.
Just because it's legal doesn't make it right. Yeah,
that's right. But it also is, well, what's happening in the broader community? I mean, you know, one of the key things that we've been talking about as an industry for a few years is the use of wearables and people's understanding of their own health and fitness and so forth. You know, understanding those sort of trends, thinking through, well, if we play this out in 5 years' time, what does that mean for the industry? What does that mean for us as actuaries? And then say, well, okay, that's where the future is going to be. Is there anything that we need to do today to start positioning ourselves to be ready for that future, rather than wait for the future to arrive and then think, well, but we're too busy trying to finesse this valuation process or incorporate this. So we can't, you know, and you just are always playing catch up rather than be proactive. And I think that's an important thing for actuaries to be thinking about and considering. You know, that bigger picture, you know, what's happening.
Bigger picture. Yeah, absolutely. So Wayne, my final question for you today is just around actuaries who are stepping into that first management role. They're new leaders, they're new managers. What top tips would you have for those actuaries, things that they can do, things that they should be thinking about in line with what you were just saying about, you know, thinking about the future and not just what's right in front of you? What are your top tips for those actuaries who are stepping into their first management roles?
Yes, so I think my top tips would be talk to somebody who's been there, done that, try and get a bit of perspective. You know, acknowledge the fact that you're going to that role for a reason. You know, people haven't chosen you for that role because you're not capable. And you don't have to tick 100% of the boxes. And not being able to tick all the boxes actually makes room for the team that you will be leading to add value and for them to get real sort of ownership and value out of that team environment. I think also remember that, you know, you have to be open to change. You know, as you start your leadership journey, you know, your experiences, as we talked about before, you know, your thinking will evolve, but that doesn't mean that you can't add value to the people below you. I think perhaps the scariest thing for me was providing feedback. I actually had, I think the scariest thing for me ever was in my current role, getting my direct reports together and saying, are you comfortable with us as a management leadership team actually openly talking about each one's performance and just sharing ideas about opportunities for growth and development? And the scary thing in that is ultimately, I mean, I had to give my view of each individual with everybody listening. And that's a really scary thing because you don't have all the answers. But I think, you know, if you demonstrate that you are committed to your people, you're being as honest as you can, you're accepting the fact that, well, if you feel I'm wrong, talk to me because I don't have all the right answers. I think that goes a long way. And I think it all comes down to being comfortable with uncertainty, because leadership is all about managing uncertainty. As actuaries, I think what we like to do with uncertainty is analyze it to the extent that there is no uncertainty.
Yeah.
That's not managing uncertainty.
It's not, and it's not possible.
That's right. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So Wayne, you've talked about courage, the importance to provide a safe environment for your team to be themselves and to bring their diversity of thoughts, skills, and perspectives to the team. You've talked about the importance of having courage to give feedback and the value that giving good feedback can provide to your team and to their development. You've talked about the importance of building your networks and finding mentors and building those other people around you that you can talk to when you've got questions or when things come up. And also the importance of shifting that mindset as actuaries from not feeling like we have to know everything, not feeling like we always have to be right, but to have that growth mindset and to know that there's more to learn and more that we will evolve and be able to develop over time. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we close our interview for today? I'm sure we could talk all afternoon with so much wisdom and experience from your 30 plus years of experience as an actuarial leader, but is there anything that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Look, I think you've summarized it really, really well. And, you know, hats off to your expertise in that, because that in itself is a skill, because we need to synthesize things down. Perhaps the only other thing that I would say is our role is very much that of the trusted advisor, and it's bringing a lot of information and a lot of complexity, synthesizing it down and creating the simple message that allows business decisions to be made. You know, we can have the most incredible systems, analysis, metrics, and so forth, but that's just information. And until that information is interpreted into actionable decisions, so forget about the experience that you have no control over, acknowledge it, understand it, but look at the experience that you do have control over, understand the levers that the business has to control those outcomes. So then craft that whole raft of information to provide a simple message to the business to say, this is the problem, these are the options that you can take, this is my recommendation. And, you know, we talked about, you know, my flying experience in the past. If you look at it, and I've never flown a 747, but if you look at the cockpit of a 747, there is hundreds of instruments there. Now, the important ones have red lights, less important have amber lights, some have green. The skill of the pilot is to monitor all of those metrics and to be able to spot when is one of those metrics saying there's a problem. And so part of the design of a cockpit, as I say, is red, you know, color coding for important things by importance. It's the same for us as actuaries. There's a lot of things that we need to monitor, but what we need to do is say, right, that's the one that's important. That's what we have to communicate. And there might be 5 things that are actually raising red flags, but the business can't deal with 5 things. It may be that you've then got to prioritize to say, look, we need to remove the white noise and say, it's these 3 things that we've got to deal with. There are a couple of other things, but these are the most pressing for now.
Yep. So it's not just about the number that comes out of the whiz-bang actuarial model that we've built. It's about being able to know what to do with that, know how to communicate that, and know how to put the right context around that so that when we're communicating our advice, people know what to do with it. And it's clear and prioritised. Wayne, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing some of your stories and your insight. And no doubt the actuaries watching this interview are going to get a lot of wisdom and tips that they'll be able to incorporate into their great actuarial careers as well. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing for our actuaries. I think it's really important.
Thanks, Wayne.
Okay.